All right. Welcome back, first grade team. It's great to see you again. You guys had a good week? Hopefully. All right. So, just a reminder of where we were at since it has been a week. We started to move through the literacy analysis guide. So, as a reminder of our first meeting, we had started by looking at problem identification. We went through some of your most recent data, compared it to historical data. And after we'd had a chance to review it, you guys were generally in agreement that you were not happy with only 58% of the first graders being on track with their early literacy skills. So, that gives us kind of a starting place to know where we're at and to shoot for that 80% that we'd like to see as the minimum of students being successful with tier one instruction. So, and then as a reminder, we looked at the survey data that was collected, not just from your team, but from all of the educators and staff who were working with students so we could get input on their feelings about knowledge, competence, and tools available for the different components of literacy, and talked about several pieces of these, but definitely noticed knowledge of dyslexia was an area that you guys feel like you could use some support with. So a reminder about that. And then we did a quick review of the programs that you had submitted in advance you were using in the classroom just to make sure everyone was on the same page. Hopefully this all sounds familiar so far. And that got us into our discussion. So when we had originally started talking, I was jotting notes on paper, and I went back and put all of those in this document and sent it to you guys this week. So you'd have a chance to look in advance, make sure you felt like it captured what we had talked about. So I did that both for the assessment section and the word recognition section with regard to instruction. Did you have any questions about any of these comments, concerns about the ratings or the evidence, or are you feeling good with that information?
No, I think I'm feeling good about that. And I'm glad you put everything all in one document so we don't have to, go back and forth every time.
Absolutely. We will keep working from this document the whole time, so everything will be in one place. All right, if everyone is feeling good, the next step then is within the context of curriculum and instruction to move on to language comprehension as that second key component that is so critical in our early literacy instruction. So we're going to have a similar conversation as we did last time about the language components of your literacy program. I'm going to start by sharing a few slides around the importance of the language comprehension components, a little bit around comprehension, vocabulary, writing, building background. And after we review those, we'll come back together just to make sure we're starting with a shared understanding. So we would go through those slides and then we're ready to dig in. So digging in here for comprehension, you can see the critical components listed here under comprehension, vocabulary and advanced writing skills. Looking at the sample lesson that you brought for your program, how much of this lesson and overall is focused on building content knowledge? You can see those first aspects there around building rich content knowledge as a really important piece of this. How much is there a focus on building background knowledge through different types of texts and read aloud on related topics?
So I think there's a lot. This is a really big focus of our program. Every lesson focuses on some background knowledge, some comprehension strategies. The units we're finding alternate. So there's some units on science. There's also some units on social studies topics. It's got lots of reading. There are selections that kids can take home and then read with their parents to learn a little bit more. The one thing that we're finding, there's some vocabulary, but they don't seem to be like the right words. And by that, I kind of mean like they don't seem to be really important for understanding. So when you were showing those slides about, I think they're called tier two words or something like that, those don't seem to be the words that we're finding in the vocabulary lesson. So I think maybe I jumped down to vocabulary, but
No problem.
I kind of think that that's important too when we're looking at the building of the background knowledge is the words that we're teaching.
Oh, absolutely. And we'll come back to that more in a minute. I think that's a really good point. I brought it up. I'm glad you brought it up. As I mentioned before, it doesn't bother me if we jump around. So that's not a problem at all. During read alouds, just to go back to that, because you mentioned lots of different texts, tell me about the questioning and prompts that are used to help support reading comprehension.
So in this lesson, they start by activating some background knowledge about our own families. They set a purpose for reading. There's a photo album story. And then we just answer some questions about the story. And then through discussion and writing, there's some concept maps that we work together to form. So I think there's a lot that goes into kind of building that knowledge and understanding before we get into the actual story.
Okay. Do students have time to explore independent reading?
Not really, because there's some decodables that are in this particular program, but they don't seem to be fully decodable. We do read some sentences together, and then we read a lot like out loud together. So like they're going to follow along with me while I do some reading.
Gotcha. So overall, it's feeling like the comprehension section, I'm hearing you talk very positively about it. It's seeming like it's a pretty strong section in the context of the different pieces we've talked about. There might be a little bit of work to do around student access to independent reading that could help support that, but that overall it's pretty good. What are your thoughts in terms of a rating for that? Do you think a 2, a 3? Where do you fall in your thinking as a team?
I don't think it's perfect. Probably 2.
Okay, I would support that.
A huge priority, but yeah, probably 2.
Okay. All right, let's come back to vocabulary for a minute, because that was a really important piece that you brought up, that there's a focus on it, but maybe not the right words. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so each lesson starts with some building knowledge, of they say key vocabulary. The words have some pictures that go along with it. Sometimes they have a short sentence and kind of include the meaning of the word in the sentence. We discuss them all and they show up throughout the unit, but they just don't seem to be like the really important words that are critical for, kids to understand what they're listening to. And lots of times we talk about them, but you go into the text and they're already defined within the text. So I'm not really sure why those are the words that are focused.
Okay, that makes sense. And it sounds like it's definitely an area we might want to revisit in terms of just what we need to see happening in the classroom, because we know vocabulary is such a critical piece of language development. I know you guys know this, and especially from the letters training that you had talked about doing, that, after decoding comes into play, vocabulary becomes that second most important component to really being able to make meaning. And so would you guys be okay with giving that a 1? So it's something we come back to look at more as, a potential factor in why our kids aren't getting to where we want them to in terms of their reading performance overall?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, and it might just be the words that have been selected. Maybe is there an option that we can select different words? Like, do you have to teach the words that are in that the publisher picks for you?
Not necessarily. So that might be something worth considering. If this is a program you guys have, can we do some work to target other vocabulary? So the words you think just aren't the appropriate ones, but that potentially there are some other ones that would be?
Yeah. So in some of the words, some of them might even be too advanced for our English learners. They might need some additional, support in understanding those. And then some words are too simple. So I'm not quite sure like where that balance is in picking the right words. And maybe we do it, maybe in some small groups or, something like that. But there's definitely a lot to talk about, because that kind of builds up the scene for what's going to come in the story or the text that they're reading or that they're listening to.
Okay, let's definitely plan on coming back to that one. And again, rating it a 1 just means it's something we don't want to lose sight of. We'll definitely come back and look at how is that something that could be strengthened? Is that one of the big analysis pieces that we're looking at that would help improve reading overall? So I'm glad you guys are aware of that and brought that piece up. That's really important. So, okay, let's take a look at writing. Is writing included in the sample lesson you brought?
So they draw a picture. So they're given a prompt, like a weekly prompt to work on. They have to draw a picture. They have to fill in a couple of different sentence frames with a word about their family. So like this one was about, foods that we, eating with our family. And so they have to fill in the blank, I eat, blank with my family. Sometimes they have to complete a concept map about families in the story. So thinking about all different kinds of words that relate to their families. They make a setting chart to learn about the different locations in the story. So they're setting them up with all kinds of like graphic organizers to do that. And then at the end, there's a bigger writing project that they have to do. And then they work in partners to plan their writing. So they plan it, they write in relation to this topic. This week it was, in this lesson, it's families. And then they have to use a checklist to check their work. And then we share with each other. So it's all this like big workup to this big project. But the problem is it's hard for first graders. Like they're working on their handwriting and they're working on their spelling. And so it's constantly, it's hard for them to focus on what they want to say and what they want to write about, because they're working so hard on just simply getting like print down onto the paper.
Okay, so it is just first grade. Is there a time that's a focus on those more foundational skills, just that practice with letter writing and, letter formation, basic spelling, all those things? Because to your point, jumping right into doing a bigger project, they're going to be stymied if they haven't had the time to work on those foundational skills.
Yeah, and I think we talked about that up in the phonics.
Yes.
We really don't have like a handwriting component. Like I can't think of a time when they actually learn how to form a letter, and then even like to use what they know about sounds to spell. That's not a focus in there either.
Okay. So in terms of the more advanced writing piece, what are your thoughts? I'm a little torn between kind of a 1 and a 2, because to your point, there are some advanced writing pieces here. There's use of graphic organizers, there's use of partners and checklists. I'm definitely hearing you mention several pieces that are part of that writing process. It's just, it may be too advanced for the kids at this point if they don't have those foundational skills.
Well, yeah, even as I'm looking at the 3 little boxes you have there, so they are asked to write, each week.
Mhm.
So that kind of checks off the box there. But like where you have that second box that says grammar and sentence structure are taught, we talk about types of sentences, but I don't know I'm actually teaching them how to write a sentence. It's almost like write a statement or write a question, but there's no actual, like I don't show them how to do any of that.
Okay. So given it's first grade, that takes me back to thinking about a 1 for this. Are you guys comfortable with that in terms of writing overall?
Yeah, because I thought
I
thought I read somewhere that they have to be able to write a sentence, like that's kind of a building block for further writing. So I'm never teaching them how to write a sentence. It's going to be hard for them to write more sentences.
Okay, I went ahead and filled in the 1 there.
Gotcha.
Thanks for expanding on that, and sorry about my coughing fit in the background.
That's okay.
It is winter. All right, and then just like with the word recognition piece, we have the instructional delivery piece here. Take a minute and look across those items and see what you think and what you would talk about from those.
So, like I said, every lesson has opportunities to write. There is a scope and sequence for the writing pieces. So, we write a narrative, and then we write an opinion piece. So there's a scope and sequence. But so one of the things it says there, I thought I read something about modeling or showing kids how to do something. Yeah. Yes, explicit instruction routines to model. I'm not sure there's much modeling of comprehension strategies, but I think maybe we might need to look at that a little bit more. It's just a lot of using the strategies, like finding a main idea, or in the one lesson we had to compare and contrast animals who lived on land and animals who lived in the water or something like that. So we talk about stuff. There's definitely strong, like stop and talk and discuss. So there's components that are there, just not everything, I guess, if that makes sense. So I don't know that it's the strongest of programs, but it's not the weakest either. So maybe a 2. somewhere.
Sounding like that's where I was going in my head for sure, that a two would make sense there based on everything you said. It's not the strongest, the weakest, it's working fine, but now that you've got more knowledge and are developing more information, you're seeing ways that maybe it could be improved upon. Okay. And then the last one, the responsiveness of students' needs. We discussed this one before, but thinking specifically about the language components, there isn't a benchmark measure for this. So, based on the classroom data you're collecting on your students and just the information you have from observation and otherwise, do you have concerns about your students' language development?
It's not a huge concern. I mean, like I said, it's not perfect, but because there's lots of times when we have kids talk with each other, they can process the vocabulary. Even with our writing, they have some time to talk about what they want to write about. So, I mean, it's not horrible. Probably two, I would say.
Okay, perfect. So, all right. Any questions about that section? That was the language comprehension section.
No?
All right. The last one we've got in tier one is just the implementation pieces. So anything that just hasn't come up through the assessment or curriculum conversations so far. So again, we would start with some background information, some slides for you just to bring us all on the same page. And then we move forward. Am I remembering correctly that your staff, and I think we just talked about this, you started participating in letters last year. So you're doing your second year this year, which is a lot more of the focus on the language comprehension pieces. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And now as we started to talk and look through these, I'm really more concerned kind of than ever about our phonics piece, because when we went through that whole volume one, I realized that our program just didn't include a lot of those elements, especially that we learned about in that phonics lesson plan or looking at the scope and sequence. So I really understand more and why that's so important. Yeah, we're even
It's hard
looking
to type and talk.
I know, sorry. Yeah, and I think our principal said we're even looking at ways, even if we can't get even like new staff with letters, she's looking at some ways that we can get new staff to make sure that they have all this same.
Okay, that's huge. So I'm going to go ahead and give this as 3, just because from a training perspective, you guys have a strong background in terms of understanding the pieces you need. Now it's just a matter of kind of pulling all the factors together to figure out how to make that work for your students. Is that fair?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. All right. Next question. Let's see, where am I on my list? Actually, the professional development and ongoing support, we answered that one kind of simultaneously while we were going. So instructional time. I've seen in your master schedule, I didn't notice specific times noted for social studies and science. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, we have to spend most of our day with reading and math. When we can, we fit in some science and social studies, but thankfully, because of our program, the reading program that we have, it kind of alternates between science and social studies topics. So that kind of helps fill in some of the gaps that we're having if we don't get to, science and social studies within the day.
Okay. So what are your thoughts in terms of rating that? Do you think a 2, obviously that's not perfect, not having that as a built-in component, because we know that background knowledge is so key, but as you point out, you're getting some of the content support through the reading. Is that a fair assessment at this point? It doesn't need to be
it's not perfect, but it's not because we have a program that has some elements in it. So maybe a 2. Yeah.
Okay. What do you think about the pacing of the program?
So if I think back to what we were talking about with word recognition, we really are kind of worried that some of those foundational skills are not, that either we're not teaching them correctly or not spending enough time on them. If we think about, that emphasis of the time that's spent. So we already kind of recognized that when we started adding in some different things, that did give some more exposure, like when we added in our Heggerty and our 6-minute solution. But I really think we need to think about the time that's being spent on that phonics instruction, and not only the time, but like how do we give them practice to build those foundational skills?
Good point. And then less concern with the language pieces and the more advanced writing comparatively.
Yeah. So if we're going to
Okay.
look at those 5 components, it's really the phonics piece that's weak. Maybe a 1 in that, but everything else 2-ish.
Okay. And possibly the writing with a 1, 2. I mean, I did hear several times. We'll just note that. Luckily, it's our form to manipulate as we'd like. So. All right. Thinking about the classroom environment, I had the chance to be in many of your classrooms and I loved it. So thank you for letting me come in and observe and be a part of the learning. It was so positive and your classrooms just had a great feel to them. So lots of good things happening. And I think you should feel good about your relationships with the kids and just the classroom culture for sure. As I looked around, there were a few things I noticed that we could definitely look at for problem solving. And it probably won't be a surprise after your training that, for example, when I noticed you still had word walls, that might be something we want to look at transitioning over to sound walls. I don't know if that's something you've thought about at all.
Yeah, that would be a good change. And it's probably not all that hard to make that adjustment.
So maybe just a 2 there, because again, some small things to come back to, but overall, it was fun to be there. All right, and the last question in this section is just about the variety of reading. From what you've said, it sounds like there's a pretty good variety of reading activities, maybe more books kids can access independently as they're learning new skills. Is a 2 fair there, perhaps some minor changes? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Any questions about that section, or so far so good?
No, I think we're cruising along.
All right, final section here. First question, switching over to think about differentiated instruction. Does everyone in the school participate in core instruction at your grade level? All English learners, students with IEPs? Does anyone move to a different location for tier 1 instruction?
No.
Okay. We're going to give that a 3 to begin with. So you mentioned you use the data after benchmarks to look at students' needs, but that you're really just looking at kind of red, yellow, and green. Are you using that to help with grouping, or can you talk a little bit more about student groups in the classroom?
So we don't have a lot of small groups. The program mostly focuses on whole group. There's some partner reading components. There's some partner practice. There's some individual practice. That the data that we have, it just kind of helps us to know who to support, but we aren't really doing, I guess, like regular small groups.
Okay. As we get to prioritizing and thinking about what might be missing, I think this could definitely be an area to revisit. There's some pretty strong research out there to show that when we think about how to use our data, not even from just the colors, but really looking at the skill needs for our students, especially in some of those younger grades, and pull them together to address their targeted needs in those small groups so that they can get more direct teacher attention, more opportunities to practice, that those can definitely make a big difference to learning. So I feel like this might be one we want to come back to just in terms of how restructuring the classroom a little bit might be able to get you more bang for your buck with student learning. Are you okay if we put a 1 for now, just to make sure we come back to where would small groups make sense within the context of literacy instruction?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay, all right. And then classroom centers. I saw some centers when I was in your room. It looked like they were largely focused on discussion and writing tasks aligned to that reading for the day. Is that correct?
Yeah, the centers are timed to work on the tasks that are aligned to the overall lesson concept.
And do students seem to be doing pretty well in those? They know what they need to do at that time?
Yeah, they seem to be. They're quiet.
Okay. Quiet is sometimes a good sign, sometimes not. So is it 2 fair then? I didn't feel like that was a hair on fire issue, but it seemed like I mean, they were aligned with the classroom learning. They were doing what they needed to do. As I walked around, they seemed to be understanding.
Yeah, and if you're going to talk I don't think it's a 3, but it's not a 1 either, but we might want to come back to it because if we're going to talk about doing more things in small groups, I guess they're going to have more things to occupy themselves if I'm going to work with a group.
That's a great point. Yeah, we definitely want to make sure that this time is well used too, and it's not busy work, that what we're giving kids is helping them, align with the work they're doing and giving them the practice opportunities they need. But that's a great point. Well, it's working now, but if we're looking at increasing that small group time, that might be something we want to come back to. So I'm glad you brought that up. So, all right, a couple final questions here. Thinking specifically about the English language learners, I know you have several students in your classroom. How do you feel about the additional supports that they need, and how are they doing?
So we have a fabulous teacher for our English learners who supports them. She pulls our students just for some additional support a couple times a week. She checks in each week, and then we just kind of work really well together. And I see that it's making a difference because my English learners, my students identified as English learners, they're really thriving. They're doing well. They're making great progress. So yeah, we're very fortunate to have somebody who can help us and support us.
That's awesome. Yes, and having somebody who you can turn to and you have a good relationship with, that makes a big difference there. So, am I hearing a 3? This is a strength right now. We'll go with it.
Yeah, I think so.
All right. How about for your students with disabilities or students in special education?
So each of us has a few kids in our classroom that are identified with a disability. What we're finding though, even in first grade, we often have to give them completely different assignments because they're really struggling with their reading and their writing. Our intervention specialist who supports them, he's great, but he also has a lot of kids on his caseload. So it's hard it's hard for him to push in. A lot of times he has to pull groups later on in the day. I'm not sure it's the best system, so we might want to come back and revisit that, especially what those students are going to need during core instruction, because a lot of times they get like kindergarten work or something like that because they don't seem to be keeping up with the regular classroom work. So I think we might need to rethink what we're doing on that one.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I made a note here that you asked if we could revisit that. I'm going to give it a 1 just so it's high on our radar, but you're absolutely right. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to help all of the kids access the grade level curriculum and content. And this can be a really, really tough one. There's no doubt about it, especially because supports are limited and we're all stretched. But I think that's a really good idea to come back and revisit that in terms of our kids who need our most intensive support and how do we help provide that. So, good thought on that. All right. Next question. We've talked about this before. It sounds like you look at the data to know where your kids are, but maybe we could be a little bit more strategic in how to use that information for small groups, which would also likely help the students in the classrooms with disabilities. Is that a fair?
Yeah. Yep.
All right.
So yeah, especially when we talk about our students with disabilities. Yeah.
Yeah. And then finally, we haven't talked at all about family involvement, parent or caregiver engagement in the classroom. How do you feel about parent and caregiver engagement?
Our parents are pretty involved. They attend conferences and they come to back to school things and orientation, stuff like that. We even have several parents who kind of help make copies for us. If we have, copier parents, whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so they're in the classroom. Do you feel like they have a beat on how to help best their kid? How to help their kids? It's been a long morning. Is there more information they might want? Do you have any sense of that?
Gosh, I'm not really sure. I don't think we've ever really asked them about something like that. Might be a good question to explore though.
Okay. It sounds like maybe not a top priority, but might be interesting to explore, again, just in thinking about all the resources we have to help our kids with learning. So probably a 2 then, just as one of those pieces to keep on our radar.
I think so, yeah.
All right. Well, after 2 fairly long sections, that gets us to the place of kind of prioritizing and looking at next steps. So at this point, what we will do before our next meeting is I will go through and kind of pull out the 3s and 1s for each of these different sections. So, where I see 3s as strengths, I'll make sure we notice those and pull those out. For example, thinking about professional development comes to mind first. Your letters training, obviously a strength. The desire to know more about dyslexia would be an area of opportunity. Phonics has definitely stood out as an area of opportunity. Comprehension strategies more of a strength. So I'll kind of go through and I'll pull all of those different ones out and put them on here. And when we have the chance to meet back next time, we'll kind of review this overall, see if we're in agreement, and start conversations about, well, where do we want to start? What do we prioritize? What do we want to see our focus be for the next year as we kind of try to move forward? We'll continue, obviously, to collect the benchmark data, monitor how students are doing to see if we're making progress, and set up some action plans. What are the steps that need to happen to put in place some new pieces based on our priorities, and we'll go from there. So I know we're out of time today. You guys got to get back to your classrooms, but that's where we'll go next. Any questions about that? Are we in a good place?
I think so. Looking forward to it.
Awesome. Sounds great. Well, thanks again. I know it's a good chunk of time at first, but hopefully you're finding it worthwhile to have a chance to come together as a team to really talk about these pieces.
All right. Fantastic. I'll be done.
I'll see you guys soon. Thanks.
Okay, bye.